Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Religious Studies Project. I'm David McConaughey, and she is...
Brianne Fallon.
And we're David and Chris, as you probably well know. But yes, so it's still the four of us doing this weird three-continent recording. And this week's podcast is another one that Sydney Castillo recorded for us at the EHR recently, called When Archive Meets AI, about computational humanities research. And it's with Katrine Frøkjaer Baunvig. And let's pass right over now.
So we are here at the EASR conference 2019 in Tartu, Estonia. And we are just moving around in between different conferences. Today is like the third day. We are tired but very happy. And I'm also happy to have Katrine Baunvig here with me at the Release Studies Project. Welcome, Katrine.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks as well for coming with us. And if you would be so kind to introduce yourself so we know a little bit about what you do.
Yes, of course. I am an associate professor at Aarhus University, where I am the director for the Grundtvig Study Center. And my background is that I'm an historian of religions. I did a PhD thesis on this guy, Danish guy, Grundtvig, and his thoughts on social cohesion, and compared these thoughts with the ones found in the collected writings of Emil Durkheim.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Excellent. So it's quite a lot. Broad work.
Yes. It is.
Perfect. So let's just dive right in to the questions. First, I think to give a proper or like a broader perspective of how digital humanities works, I would ask that how digital humanities can aid in the study of religion.
Yeah. Well, that's a really broad question.
Sorry.
No. They are usually great to think with. So what can they aid? They can aid with a multitude of methods handling already known data sets, and they can produce new kinds of data. That would be my take. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But actually, I kind of prefer to I don't use the term digital humanities so much as I prefer to speak of computational humanities, because in a certain sense, digital humanities already have gone into, well, it's like that with all fields of scholarship in their formative states, that they struggle to find the correct terms and produce new ones all the time. So for me at least, digital humanities can at least signal anything from philosophical reflections of what the consequences are for us as a species, that we now have to deal with the digital as sort of with capital letters. So for me, what I do and what we do at the Grundtvig Study Center is that we have digitized the entire writings of Grundtvig, and I hope to get a chance to sort of expand on who he was and why that is relevant to digitize his works. Mm-hmm. But we have now a digitized corpus of his writings. We scanned it, OCR scanned it, and made HTML markup. So it's in a really good quality, and therefore we can do different kinds of computational investigations into this corpus, and that is what we do. Yeah.
Excellent. So it's corrected. Computational humanities.
Yeah, yes.
I think the more precise, the better. Really.
Okay.
So speaking about Grundtvig, who was Nikolaj Frederik Severin Grundtvig's name? And why the digital preservation of his works are of great importance for Danish society?
Yeah. Well, Nikolaj Frederik Severin Grundtvig, really long and hard to pronounce name. Well, he was and is in the Danish self-understanding. On the one hand, a nation builder or a founding father, perhaps, and on the other hand, a church father of a sort. He was born in 1783 and died in 1872, and that was a really important period of time in Danish national history. This was the period where where the nation went from, well, if you accept the idea of a long Middle Age period, you could say that he died on the eve of the Middle Ages. Mm-hmm. At least he died during or just before the feudal structures of Denmark collapsed. Well, he was born. Sorry, he was born just before these structures collapsed, and then he died just when Denmark entered into modernity. That is the general narrative of Grundtvig, and that is the understanding of the 19th century in Denmark. And then he was active within all of the domains in change in Denmark. So he was active as a pastor. He was a priest. And a kind of theologian. And then he was very much influenced by the Romantic movement and sort of rebooted or went along the idea that the old Norse mythology had to be revived within the Danish population. One of the ideas of his was that you had to make a sort of social content preparing people for feeling connected with the overall idea of the people, because we now had this new governmental structure, the democracy, and his idea was that you had to install responsibility and feelings of love in the population. So it was a nationalist logic. You have to get the people to really feel responsible for the broad spectrum of Denmark. If we have to make this democracy work. So in that sense, he was politically engaged and mythologically engaged, and he wrote quite a deal and reflected quite a deal on pedagogical stuff, didactic stuff, how to get people to know of their cultural heritage and how to make them want to engage with it and feel connected to it. So he was also an architect behind a new kind of educational form, or in a sense that is what we now say many other agents and men mainly were really influential in that movement. But now today his name is also connected with this loose and kind of lax form of education that you call folk high schools. That's a phenomenon in still living alive in Denmark and other places around the world. So in that sense, Grundtvig is seen as a very important person during this period where the modern Denmark was created. And you can see that amongst politicians in Denmark today. So when they want to signal that they know stuff about Danish history, and at the same time signal that they are liberal, they can quote Grundtvig. And they tend to do so in the public media oftentimes. And furthermore, Grundtvig is a central name within the manifestos of every political party within the Danish parliament except one. So in that sense, he is seen as a founding father for almost every every part of the political spectrum in Denmark. So he's in that sense a non-controversial figure that everybody seems to agree that he is. He's our guy,
Right.
And that is why, or perhaps one more example of this is perhaps the center where I'm the director, the Grundtvig Study Center. We are governmentally funded, and the main task is to digitize his entire works. And that is a thing that politicians can agree upon as a worthy task, and using money for this task, and it is actually quite expensive. So, in that sense, money talks and says that Grundtvig is important for Denmark. He's an important figure that we want to spend money on digitizing this work. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, and I can imagine that it's also present in the imaginary of the people, like everyday life. Like it's a cultural reference.
He's a cultural reference. There are certain spheres where Grundtvig are more relevant than others. So we have cultural strands. We have one movement, or what I struggle to find the correct term, but we call it Grundtvigianism. A movement driven by the ideas of Grundtvig, and what I forgot to mention was that Grundtvig was also a grand author of hymns or composer of hymns. So I kid you not, he wrote 1,600 hymns, and 250 of them now constitute 1/3 of the Danish hymn book in the Danish folk church, the Danish church. So people know of him. I'm not quite sure whether for the broad population he's important in everyday life as such.
Right.
But when you discuss cultural heritage and democracy and liberal stances and tolerance within the church and stuff like that, Grundtvig is sort of seen as a gravitational point or something along those lines. Yeah.
Right. Excellent. Delving now on your research, what I would like to ask you is, what was the procedure to develop the Grundtvig AI?
Yeah.
There is one.
Yeah, because there is one, or we are building one. Okay, so the idea, this is actually a bit of fun. We're just teasing around with what to do with all this material. And as a sort of branding strategy, we decided that we would resurrect Grundtvig as an artificial intelligence on the day of his 150th death day, or what have we, in September 2022. So we have quite some time. Yeah, there is still time. So first of all, we did, and actually almost done with the construction of a chatbot. So based on the idea of recurrent neural network systems. So we built a chatbot. And the idea was, so I can develop that or expand that, but the overall idea is to take this chatbot and then put it into an actual robot. So there's a physical robot that looks like Grundtvig. He has he was really spooky, and people will recognize him as this gloomy, old, bearded man in black. And we want to do an actual physical robot that looks like Grundtvig, and so that people can interact with him.
Whoa.
And perhaps he can, I don't know, give a sermon, give a speech in Parliament. So we're really excited about this project. But in a certain sense, we're just teasing around with the possibilities of this digital data. But I'm really looking forward to seeing the reactions to this resurrection, to see how the different cultural reactions would be when it is possible to engage with Grundtvig as an artificial intelligence. And perhaps I should now expand a bit on how we sort of build it. So what we do is so let me just sort of try not to get into all the acronyms So the basic is that we use machine learning. We train an algorithm on first of all, we take the Grundtvig corpus and train it on that. So and the aim is to have users interacting with Grundtvig or the Grundtvig intelligence or what have we. The corpus consists of what amounts to 37,000 standard pages. If you had to read through them, it is in fact possible, but people turn out really weird when they do so. So I really prefer not to. I like to pick specific bits and then read through them. No, but so just kidding. And that is only his published writings that we use. So we take that as a beginning point, but it is in fact in this context a really small data set. So we have to train the algorithm on relevant other relevant stuff. So we are in fact very lucky that the Danish Royal Library has digitized every Danish newspaper published ever. Since the late, I think it is 1660 or so. So we can take the relevant 19th century material, and the idea is that you sort of furnish the intelligence with the period that it lived in, so to speak. And then we also have available relevant novels of the age. So we train it on that. And then the idea is to find contextually relevant material, adding to the system, as it were. So of course there are many problems with this. So if you have to sort of philosophically discuss, would this be a representative of who Grundtvig really was? Well, no, of course it wouldn't. It is based on what he not what he wrote, but what he published. And in fact, Grundtvig himself was very eager to point out that there is a long way from the way you communicate with your with your mouth and with your hands. Right. So he had this, I don't know, catchphrase, or he was really keen on the idea of the so-called living word. That was his term. and that was the oral communication as the correct way to, or the easiest way to transport ideas and feelings and stuff like that. So this idea of us taking his writings as sort of a proxy for who he was goes against what he would have himself. He would not have agreed. So the hope is, because we also have outreach obligations at our center. The hope is that we can have people will find it interesting and a fun thing to discuss, and then I can tell them a bit more qualified information about Grundtvig during that process. When that is said, I think it will be interesting to see how can one interact with this thing, and what will people do with it. How will they think of it? That is, so there is sort of an anthropological observational study waiting a few years ahead. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah,
and going back to how you proceed to develop the Grundtvig guide.
Yeah.
In your presentation of now the ESR 2019, you work pretty much about this. This work was coming up all the time. Word embedding.
Yeah.
About all throughout his writings, and how this also is a reference of his own talk.
Yeah.
Could you share some of your major findings with us?
Yeah, for sure. What I presented here yesterday was an investigation that used sort of the basic methods we used to construct, or at least the same material we used to construct the chatbot. But here we used it to embed or deeply contextualize in a semantic network specific keywords that I, as a Grundtvig scholar, were interested in seeing the network between. And this study was for me interesting because I wanted to, because I'm a historian of religions, and I'm interested in cosmologies. So I would like to see what is, in fact, how to tease out the worldview of Grundtvig. Can you do that with these texts? Obviously, I have read a lot of them, almost. I'm not, okay, so I haven't read all of them, because you turn out, as I said, really weird when you do so, but I have read quite a lot of them. So I had an idea of what I would find, but as it turned out, it was actually really, okay, so the interesting thing is that we have this modernist figure on the one hand. That is what we think of him as in Denmark. This the father of Danish modernity, as it were. And I know, because I've read a lot of his works, that he had or held a sort of geocentric medieval worldview.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he really. He's really explicit on the fact that he thinks of the world as the earth as the center of the universe, and uses ideas of paradise, earthly paradise, and earthly sky, as opposed to heavenly sky with God and angels and stuff like that, and hell, a literal idea of hell, and that was not typical in the 19th century for mainstream Christian thinking, or at least not within educated elites, and he as a theologian, Grundtvig was one of those. And I would like to see if I could sort of find that, or visualize this fact. So what we did was to see how the keywords heaven, earth, and hell, how they related to each other. And we did so by using a specific approach called ELMO, where and the idea is that you take for each keyword 10 associations, the 10 nearest association at sentence level. So you go through the total corpus and see if I'm interested in heaven, what in which way and in a how to say this, which other words does this significantly cling to through the corpus, and then you
tied in that word.
Yeah, exactly. What is the semantic context of this word? So then we had, so you call that a cap. And then we had 3 caps or 3 associations for each association to sort of see how does that, how does these words that you find clinging to heaven, how does this integrate into their semantic network? And I did that for 3 keywords, and then collapsed the networks and see how do they integrate to then have a semantic network of these different spheres. And the interesting thing from that is that you can take that analysis and then from that gather or see there arising semantic clusters within the network. And the very interesting finding here was that there is a clearly demarked cluster for sort of earthly surroundings, or you have earth in the center, and then you have a semantic cluster of things going from the earthly sky, you have the earthly sphere, and then the earthly sky, and then you have a sort of earthly paradise, words signaling earthly paradise, and then you have a netherworld kind of thing connected to death, but on earth. And then you have an entirely different cluster in the network that is ontologically seen further from Earth than the first one. That one has to do with heaven and hell. So you can sort of see that the clusters surrounds the Earth in a way that it would do if you have a geocentric worldview. So the Earth is sort of the center, and then you have the other spheres sort of interacting around it. And what in order to saturate or to furnish further this investigation, I found it necessary to take each keyword and see how they perform not within the network. So can I sort of word embed them for themselves and see if there is something dragging it in a specific direction. And what I found was that one of the interesting findings here was that Earth in Grundtvig's writings is a thing preserved for, or a thing, a place thought of in biblical terms. in archaic style, biblical style, or in Old Norse style. So he think of the earth as a paulun, or a tent, this Semitic idea embedded in the Bible or in the Old Testament of the world as a tent. Or there is this idea of the world as God's footrest. Also an idea from the Bible. And finally, there is one example more could be the idea of the world as Emir, the Old Norse god whose corpse was made into the earth. So it is an extremely non-scientific and non-naturalistic kind of way of speaking or writing about life on Earth. And from there, we could sort of feel kind of secure, or I have the idea that Grundtvig, in that sense, could be said to be a representative of an medievalism as such, as an cultural stream or flow within the 19th century was rather prominent, and this, in this way, Grundtvig's worldview could be seen within that context.
I think that's like quite a good way of mapping his thought to implement in the AI as well. Intuitively, that comes to my mind in some way. For the last question, is one thing that you addressed constantly in the previous question is that what does the Grundtvig AI imply for the creation of Grundtvig's legacy in the current Danish imaginary? I think that's very interesting because, as you said, when people are going to interact with the AI, something is going to happen.
Yeah, I'm really not sure. I'm really not sure what is going to happen. I think that there will be some, Grundtvig enthusiasts, and these are mainly old people. They will be quite angered, or well, at least I hope so. I hope that it will be something that you could have the opportunity to have a debate in the public media about. But I think that for others it would be a fun fact that now you can try to engage with this collection of writings in another way. And but I'm interested in just observing how sort of the idea of agency, because it's a robot looking like Grundtvig, what that does to the whole thing. I'm really not sure. As it happens, we're really happy that the Danish National Museum has agreed to host him, as it were. So when the robot is to be, or when Grundtvig is to be artificially revived, he will have a home at the Danish National Museum, and you can visit him in his office, and you can go and ask him questions. What up, Grundtvig? What's up with the living word and all the ideas of the folk high school? And then we hope that he will perform and answer in ways that are sort of sensible, because that is of course what is almost well, that will be very interesting for us to see how good we can make him respond. I think we're in luck that he was from the 19th century, and in order to sort of get a form of authenticity, we have to make him a bit weird and archaic. But it is also a fact that almost everyone who knows of Grundtvig will know that he was himself really weird and polemic and colorful and in a certain sense culturally a bit offbeat. That was how he was conceived within his time, and that so if the robot doesn't perform as a closely to human interaction skills, we can tell the story about the weird guy Grundtvig.
He was like that.
He was like that. He was awkward and offbeat and stuff like that. Yeah. But yeah. So I'm really. I would like to have a better answer to your good question, but I'm just not sure.
Sure. I think we have to wait until 2022.
Yes. I invite you. I hereby invite you to come and see what happens.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And not only what people think about the Grundtvig AI, but also what the Grundtvig AI will think about current day society.
Precisely.
I think that would be also interesting anthropological and philosophical.
Yes,
question.
and just as now you mentioned it yourself. That is one thing that many politicians and scholars or people engaging in the public debates of Denmark tend to do. So only last week I heard a scholar from the University of Southern Denmark proclaiming that if Grundtvig was alive today, he would have voted for Trump.
Oh my.
Yeah. So, but and that is that type of proclamations or suggestions can now be tested. Would you? Yeah.
We have to do another podcast in 2020.
Yeah. Then we will ask Grundtvig. You can interview him.
We will interview him next time. Definitely, that will be bizarre and fun at the same time. Well, Katrine, it was very nice to have you here. And we hope to see you again in the future.
I hope to get the opportunity to introduce you to the Grundtvig robot. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you as well for being part of the RSP.
So thanks for Sydney and Katrine for that really stimulating podcast. David and Chris, what do we have coming up next time?
Well, next time it's a bit of a sort of odd compilation podcast. We had a couple of again RSP regulars, Vivian Asimos and Theo Wildcroft, were roving reporters at the BASR conference last month in Leeds, and we've got Suzanne Owen, Don Llewellyn, Bettina Schmidt, Jonathan Tuckett, Aled Thomas, Tim Hutchings, Stephen Brooks, and a certain David Robertson and Chris Carter, all sort of reflecting on the state of the study of religion in the UK and a little bit about the conference itself.
Yeah, it kind of starts off being about the conference, but quickly turns to more sort of pressing issues of employability and short-term job contracts and the upcoming ref and kind of where the discipline's going. So it's really quite an interesting snapshot of the field, as well as being about the conference. Is kind of a snapshot of the field, particularly through the eyes of kind of younger scholars. Which is an interesting thing to do, 8 years after we did our kind of What's the Future of Religious Studies episode way back in our first run of episodes.
Exactly. And one of the things they talk about is the Research Excellence Framework, or the REF, which is this big assessment of university research outputs that happens every 5 years now in the UK. And it's sort of weighing heavily on academics' minds. In your context, Dave and Brianne, is there anything similar like that with this sort of neoliberalization of higher education, this sort of pressure to publish and publish in appropriate, high-ranking journal? Or are you aware of your research being ranked in this sort of quite sort of business-like fashion, or any reflections on that?
I think here in the US, the state of the field is so broad. There's so many different kinds of universities funded in so many different ways and so many different kinds of departments that those efforts, at least at the higher education level in the US, are not quite present yet. But I think a lot of us are starting to think really seriously about how we can attract more students to religious studies majors. And some of the early efforts to that coming out of places like the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and then University of Georgia, and just recently the University of Vermont. All of these places are beginning to start to think about certificates and wondering whether religious literacy is a kind of professionalization degree that we can offer to health services. So I think that's as far as the field in the U.S., as broad as it is, has gotten. Brianne probably feels differently about Australia. What do you think, Brianne?
It's been a number of years since I've worked in a university. It's been 2 years since I left the University of Sydney, but I definitely recall the concept of a points-based system. You know, a book review is 1 point, a journal article is so many, a book chapter is so many, and the idea that you had to sort of reach a certain amount per year to sort of, you know, be seen as in the good books. And I remember we had a fabulous departmental lecture where the whole system was questioned, because you aren't going to just churn out a book for 5 points in, you know, next to no time. And so you're spending the years leading up to, you know, the publication of that book, and then you get a raft of points. And then, you know, what about the years leading up to that? Of course, you were working on that book. So the idea that the system didn't really understand the nature of how publications actually work and what that actually looks like when you're preparing those larger pieces of work. And there was recently, in response to this points-based system, an article in our major Sydney newspaper where there's been a raft of academics who actually have been approached by sort of dodgy journals where you pay to publish your work. And there's been a lot of sort of actually skimming through journals like that because of the pressure to publish. And it's become quite problematic, so much so that a mainstream newspaper put it on page 6. So we're definitely seeing this on-flow effect of this pressure to sort of appease the point system.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, here as well, you definitely are seeing the publishing system, I guess, being entirely geared towards, you know, we have to get all of this stuff out by this point, and, you know, scholars dropping projects so that they can get one book out in time for the next ref, and these kind of publishing cycles. And if you haven't got your book in basically by December coming up, you know, it's not going to come out this ref cycle. You might as well take another 5 years for all it matters.
Wow.
You know, in terms of your career prospects or the institutional capital that you can gain from it. It's it's an interesting system.
Yeah. So come back for that. Hopefully not too depressing. And I think there's some optimism in there as well.
Well, there's some gags, you know, there's some jokes.
Come back for that next week. And next week, who knows? It's hopefully going to be the first time that a podcast will miraculously appear without David and I having to do the recording.
That would be fun, wouldn't it? But I mean, we're still gonna. I'm hoping to appear now and again. Like maybe when I'm in Australia in December, Brianne and I can record some intros in person. That might be fun. But yeah, next week it's Brianne. It's the Brianne and Dave show. We've been promising it for about 3 weeks now. Next week it's happening. So maybe what remains of this episode is for Dave and Brianne to say,
thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
The Religious Studies Project is sponsored by the British Association for the Study of Religions, the North American Association for the Study of Religion, and the International Association for the History of Religions. The Religious Studies Project is produced by the Religious Studies Project Association, SCIO, a Scottish charitable incorporated organisation, charity number SC047750. brought to you by editors Brianne Fallon and David McConaughey, and founding editors Chris Cotter, that's me, and David Robertson, that's him. Our features are edited by Rebecca Barrett-Fox, with marketing managed by Benjamin Marcus. Our Opportunities Digest managed by Ella Buck, podcast transcription by Helen Bradstock, and social media managed by Ray Radford. Don't forget, you can support the project by using our amazon.com.co.uk and .ca links, or donating at patreon.com/projectrs. And you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, iTunes, and other portals. Thanks for listening.